The myth of a great flood is one of the most pervasive stories in human culture. Just about every civilization has its own flood myth, from the ancient Greeks and the Chinese to the Native Americans and Mayans. In the West, the most obvious example of this is the Genesis flood story from the Bible. But why do so many different cultures around the world speak of the same catastrophic event? Is it possible that this great flood actually happened? Let's find out.
There's 51 million people entering another
surveillance camera capturing the
unidentified flying object.
lockdowns and mass testing.
Today that the world is going to end.
Researchers are often quick to dismiss the validity of myths and legends, but the truth is that these oral traditions are often rooted in reality. If humanity really did experience a civilization-ending catastrophe tens of thousands of years ago, only a few survivors would have remained. These lucky few would have told stories of what happened, and these stories would have transformed into myths and legends as time went by. So what are the most famous flood myths? One of the earliest recorded flood myths comes from the Mesopotamia culture. This story was part of the famous Epic of Gilgamesh, and it involved a man being warned by a god to build a large boat and survive the coming cataclysm. This early myth dates back to at least 4,000 years, and is believed to have inspired the later biblical flood story. The Vedic texts of Hindu cultures are also thousands of years old, and they too mention a great flood, with a man being instructed by a god to build a giant boat. Zoroastrianism, the world's oldest surviving religion, yet again speaks of a man surviving a great flood by building an ark. The ancient Greeks had a very similar story called Timaeus, which was written by Plato. Once again, a man is instructed by a god to build an ark in order to survive a coming flood. The Cheyenne of North America also have legends that speak of a catastrophic flood. These are just a few examples, and virtually every major culture in human history has some variation of a flood myth. It goes without saying that this event seems to be rooted in humanity's subconscious, regardless of ethnic or geographic boundaries. So did it actually happen? Today, scientists know with an absolute certainty that the Earth has in fact experienced massive, catastrophic floods. And here's the most important detail. Humans were around to witness the floods. Evidence of a great deluge in the Mesopotamian regions is quite convincing. In 1954, Sir Charles Leonard Woolley excavated royal tombs at Ur and discovered artifacts buried under 8 feet of mud. He concluded that it must have been caused by the great flood mentioned in the tales of the Epic of Gilgamesh. Some geologists believe that the mythical flood has roots in the last great glaciation, which began about 20,000 years ago. During this time, half the globe was covered in thick ice sheets, which ran from the North Pole all the way to present-day New York and Chicago. Because so much of the Earth's water was frozen during this period, sea levels were much, much lower. When the Earth began to heat up, there was only one possible result. The glaciers melted, causing the Mediterranean to overflow and pour into the Black Sea basin. But how quick was this flood? Was it a gradual rise in sea level, or did it happen fast enough to catch everyone off guard? In some places, the flooding was extremely sudden. In the Mediterranean, the Black Sea basin would have flooded with enough water to cover Manhattan 2 times the height of the World Trade Center. In other areas, the ocean would have moved closer and closer to land at a rate of about 1 mile per day. In 2016, evidence of a massive flood was discovered in the Yellow River Valley of China. A natural dam broke in this area about 4,000 years ago, releasing 3.8 cubic miles of water. But perhaps the most notable evidence of the Great Flood is located here, in North America. About 12,000 years ago, ice sheets covered the northern hemisphere during a period known as the Younger Dryas. Humans and large mammals like the saber-toothed tigers were wiped out during the Big Freeze event. At around this time, the glacial Lake Agassiz flooded and released an insane amount of water into the Atlantic and Arctic Oceans. Some believe that this flooding of the Atlantic could have wiped out the mythical civilization of Atlantis. The dates match up perfectly, as Plato states that Atlantis was destroyed 9,000 years before his time, which is 12,000 years before today. But here's the most important question of all. What triggered this catastrophic flood 12,000 years ago? A glacier doesn't just decide to randomly melt. Something must have caused this flood. Mainstream science states that the Younger Dryas was associated with significant glacial melting, but they neglected to mention why or how the glaciers melted. Some say that ice ages are linked with the tilt of the Earth's orbit. The truth is that they don't really know what causes glaciers to melt or freeze. One of the most controversial theories is called the Younger Dryas Impact Hypothesis. According to this theory, the Younger Dryas was triggered by an asteroid impact. Proponents of this theory claim that an asteroid impact could have caused the glaciers to melt, resulting in a massive flood followed by an impact winter. An asteroid impact of sufficient magnitude would generate insane amounts of energy, creating more than enough heat to melt glaciers. An impact winter is similar to a nuclear winter, and it occurs after a significant amount of dust and ash blankets the Earth's atmosphere and blots out the sun. This event could explain the mass extinction of large mammals and the complete eradication of the Clovis people in North America. One of the most convincing pieces of evidence that supports this theory is the so-called black mat found within the soil layer. This is essentially a layer of ash left behind by an asteroid. Scientists have found a black mat that dates back about 12,000 years, and this layer contains substances like nanodiamonds, iridium, and platinum. These are all minerals associated with asteroid impacts. Meteoric fragments may have struck areas like Chile and the Middle East around this period. There are even those who suggest that the megalithic site of Göbekli Tepe was built to commemorate this meteor strike, as stone pillars seem to refer to a specific date about 12 to 13,000 years ago. The carvings also seem to depict a group of meteors known as the Taurids. These are some of the most dangerous meteors that fly through our solar system, and they have impacted the Earth in the past. It is believed that the famous Tunguska event of 1908 was caused by a fragment from the Taurids. Another less common theory involves a solar outburst. A sudden increase in solar activity could have certainly melted the glaciers, causing a serious flood. This is the hypothesis of the well-known geologist, Dr. Robert Schoch. Here's the most worrying thing about humanity's ever-present flood myth. It could happen again. In fact, some believe that we're long overdue for another cataclysm. Who knows? Maybe you'll be one of the few survivors, and your story of this event will eventually become a legend tens of thousands of years from now.